Greetings and welcome to IT SPARC Cast Top 10. I'm your host, John Barger.
And I'm your host, Lou Schmidt. Let's get to the countdown.
In IT SPARC Cast Top 10, we go through the top 10 things, events, or people in a specific category. We then give you the details that you might not know about with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, each with over 20 years experience working in IT or for IT vendors.
And for us, this is the fun stuff because we get to research some really interesting things. And especially in the case of this one and some of the ones that are coming up, is we've lived through them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've actually been either at these companies or have acquired technologies from these companies and or had neighbors whose parents worked at these companies. It means we were really lucky to be in on some extremely foundational things. So,
and as Luke kind of clued you in a little bit, we are talking about companies today, and he used a adjective that might give you a little clue as to where some of these companies may have ended up. But in today's episode, we're counting down the top 10 biggest networking companies that no longer exist. And we're very careful not to word that in that they failed, that they just no longer exist. And some of them may have failed and some of them may have gone on to other things. We'll get into that for each one individually. And again, as Lou mentioned, this was really interesting for us to research because Lou and I either know somebody that has worked for one of these companies or worked for one of these companies ourselves or worked for a company that acquired one of these companies. So again, a lot of good research and a lot of good memories that came up during this. And today we're listing these companies based on their peak market cap from lowest to highest. So whatever they peaked at on their market cap, that would be where we targeted them on the list. And again, from lowest to highest. If you're watching on YouTube, comment below for your guess of what's going to be the number one based on market cap before we get there. It was a big hitter at a really, really high market cap, even by today's standards. So take a guess and let's get right to it. Lou, take us to number 10.
absolutely. Let's talk about number 10. And number 10 would be Proteon Corporation. Now, originally it was founded in 1972 in Westboro, Massachusetts. And it was founded by Howard Salwan and others, and it was initially focused on developing networking equipment, notably pioneering commercial token ring products. Now, for our younger listeners out there that have never even heard of token ring was a sort of proprietary layer 2 technology that was originally pioneered by IBM as their answer to sort of Ethernet that was actually reliable. And the thing that I used to love about Token Ring, it was a very deterministic protocol. You could really do real-time networking, which is why you may go some places and still see it in some manufacturing lines. So their most notable product was their Token Ring products, second only to IBM in the market of Token Ring adapters, and the perceived leader in the fast-growing internetworking market. So back before if we knew what was going to win networking, Token Ring was a major player. TCP/IP was a thing, but there were a bunch of other networks running, like Banyan Vines and Novell Netware and all that stuff that also ran across this. So Proteons was one of the first ones out there to have TCP/IP and Token Ring routing simultaneously. So they had the ability to route ports, or you could route into the token ring. And that's where I ran into them. So my very first networking job was working for NASA Science Internet, which was where the M-Bone, if you've ever heard of the multicast M-Bone, was created by NASA Science Internet. So what happened with Proteon? They got up there. We think they got up to about 40 million. The thing was, they struggled to compete with larger companies like IBM. And what happened, in my personal experience, what I saw, Cisco came in and just completely owned the multi-protocol market. Cisco supported more protocols. It required less space. They had more resources. And that's really what sort of killed Proteon. If you ever saw one of their devices, they were basically 286 chassis with cards in them. And of course, at that point, the early AGS routers from Cisco were really big too. But when they launched their 2500 series and their 4500 series, they shrunk it down a lot. And that was a huge deal for us because it was always about rack space, right? How much space you could get in a thing. They eventually declined. They were acquired by the Networks Corporation in 1999, and I don't think we've seen them since. Have you?
No, I haven't. I think that's pretty much an old school technology that's really not much used anymore, token ring and such. So I mean, I guess they could have evolved from there, but
Well,
I do remember.
they tried to do FIDI,
Yeah,
and then we did what the
I love his
technology
albums, by the way.
that we eventually settled on. I think was EAPS and ERPs.
Right.
ERPs is probably the biggest successor to this, but I don't think it's quite as deterministic. The whole thing about passing the token bus around made it really great for real time.
Yep,
So why
100%.
don't you take us to number 9?
So number 9 was SynOptics Communications. This was founded in 1985 in Santa Clara, California, by Andrew Ludwig and Roland Schmidt. Any relation?
No, but spelled
No.
properly. World's full
There
of
it is.
shit.
It is properly spelled. Their first product, they developed networking equipment that utilized telephone lines for computer communication. So this was twisted pair. They had a modular Ethernet hub. They were one of the first to commercialize Ethernet over unshielded twisted pair, what we today just call regular Ethernet cabling. And this is the innovation that really led to structured cabling and modern office networks. And this was really a big deal because before this, a lot of networking was done over coax, and that was really error prone. And if you had one break, then the entire network would go down. And this really led to a revolution in reliability of networks. By 1992, SynOptics had skyrocketed the revenue and reached over $388 million in revenue. They really had not gone public at this point, so we don't know what the true market cap was. But with 388 million in revenue, their market cap had to be some multiple of that. What happened next was that SynOptics merged with Wellfleet to form Bay Networks, and eventually Bay Networks, kind of moved on, and we're going to talk about them a little bit later.
So do you want to talk about number 8?
Let's move on to number 8.
Absolutely. So number 8. So if you know anything about number 7, you know something about number 8, right? This is famous, and I'll tell you why. Number 8 was Wellfleet Communications, and it was founded in 1986 in Bedford, Massachusetts, by Paul Severino, Bill Seifert, Stephen Willis, and David Rowe. And their first product was a high-performance multi-protocol internetworking product. So as you can tell already, they're already head-to-head up with the nascent Cisco that had come around the same time. And their most notable project was the CN, the concentrator node, which was released in June of 1988 and supported up to 52 connections for bridging or routing LANs and WANs. That was back when integrated routing and bridging was a big deal. It's really hard to do, and they did a good job on it. So they were so dominant in routing in the early 90s that some analysts predicted they would overtake Cisco. The routers even powered large parts of early NSFNet background, and I know about this, before the internet commercialization era. They were actually a very high quality product. Specific market cap figures are not readily available, but Wellfleet was recognized as one of the fastest growing public companies in the nation during its peak. So no controversies really. Wellfleet did not fail independently. It merged with SynOptics. So now we have to talk about the couplet, right? The pair of these, to form Bay Networks, aiming to compete effectively with Cisco systems. And let me just go say, this is a legend. I grew up in the Silicon Valley. This is legend.
Yeah.
The Wellfleet SynOptics acquisition is the textbook for how not to do an acquisition. Right? They were massive clashes in culture, and that really destroyed them. I would have to say what really took them down was the whole tension between the East Coast and the West Coast, because in early networking days, a lot of this stuff came out of MIT. But at that point, a lot of the IP-based networking was West Coast, right? It was invented at Berkeley. On the East Coast, you had the MIT connection. It used to be called the Route 128 corridor for the invention. You don't hear much about that anymore. Not in data networking, because there was more venture capital available in the West. They merged to form Bay Networks, which is subsequently acquired by Nortel. One of the things I figured out though, because I was in on the early days when we were ripping out the Proteons, we had Cisco's and we had Bay Networks. Bay Networks required a client to configure their stuff. You had to load a client on a PC. They called it Site Manager. We all called it Site Mangler. And it was very inconsistent and a real pain to use. And laptops were just starting to get cheap at that point. But with Cisco, you could go in and you could edit a text file. And I would have to say that was one of the big reasons that Cisco ended up winning, is they won over the geeks. Yeah, Bay Networking is the byline in the Valley for failed acquisition.
Yeah. So I lived very close to and worked very close to Bedford, Massachusetts. And for a number of years, I worked in Burlington, Massachusetts, which is right next to Bedford. And I knew and worked with a bunch of people that had worked with one of the companies that made up Bay and then moved into Nortel and eventually moved into Avaya from there. And it was always a mess. And I've met, there were a couple of those folks were really great people. A couple of them were kind of jerks, so the whole gamut as you would expect from any group of people that you would meet. And you could see why there was some clashes there. There was just, and I heard stories, especially as I got to the Nortel side of things, of spending money crazily. And then, again, some of those proprietary things like the software, the software client, just bad decisions being made. And it is what it is. It's why companies tend to sometimes they succeed because of proprietary stuff. We see that in wireless sometimes, but sometimes it really kills a company, especially if there's already more openness that already exists in that industry.
Absolutely. Can you take us to number 7?
I can. So number 7 is Foundry Networks. Founded, no pun intended, in 1996 in Sunnyvale, California by Bobby Johnson. Their first product was high-performance Ethernet switching and routers, and their most notable product was the Big Iron switch. And this was known for being a high-capacity routing and switchable solution. So again, as we're starting to get into the mid and late 90s, that getting high capacity, high speed iron was really, really important. So that's when you start seeing companies like Extreme Networks start coming out, and Big Iron is the name, and really starting to push those bombastic names. And Foundry was right there with Big Iron and being part of that. According to the notes that I have, it says that Foundry was the first company to ship a gigabit Ethernet switch. I also know that that Extreme Networks makes that claim as well. So as to which one was actually first, we're going to leave that to the world to argue over, because both make claim to that. At the end of the day, a lot of that technology all resides with one company now. So at the end of the day, they can still make that claim, but we'll leave that to actually who was the first to ship to make that
come
claim.
fight it out in the comments. We'd be really interested to know, because we've seen it claim both ways. It's possible that maybe Foundry was the first to ship it in a chassis, and Extreme was the first to ship it in.
As a
modular. I don't know. I don't know.
They were also one of the first to fully embrace the layer 4 to 7 switching. And I remember around this time as well, when you would actually hear them refer to things like layer 4 switches. And before that, it was, you have a layer 2 switch, was just a straight flat switch, didn't have that routing like Lou was talking about earlier in this session. And so that was something that was a really big deal at that time. And they also had things like load balancers, so that you could actually say that I'm going to send some traffic off to this port and some traffic off to this port, and be able to really handle distribution of load so that you didn't overwhelm different servers and devices and things like that. From a market cap standpoint, they achieved market capitalization approximately $8.7 billion following their IPO in 1999. Now, for those of you that were around at that time, 1999 was a big deal when it came to IPOs. That was right at the peak of the dot-com boom, right before the crash.
It was crazy.
It was crazy. We used to talk about the fact that you could start a company called runningwithscissors.com and still get your IPO to take off. But I also remember companies like Bolt, Bannock, and Newman rebranding themselves as Genuity, and then they would IPO that same summer and completely tanked. And that was, no matter what anybody else says, they were the company that really did invent the internet. And they couldn't survive that IPO. So this was a crazy, crazy time. And then the total market crashed right after that. Quick story about that. In 2000, I was at a company that got acquired in August of 2000. In September of 2000, I was building a lab. I was a director. I got $10 million budget approved for the lab, approved in 1 hour. The following April, I needed VP approval to get a wireless card for my laptop. That's how that market changed that quick when the crash happened in 2001. So anyway, moving on. So Foundry did not so much fail as it got acquired and enhanced other companies' portfolios. They were acquired by Brocade on December of 2008 for approximately $3 billion. So that's what happened to them. And then we know that Brocade eventually got bought by Broadcom and then split off and sold off to a few different companies.
Brocade needed to broaden into the IP space, and they bought one of the best companies out there to do it, which was Foundry. That was actually, I had a friend deploy a Foundry Brocade-based data center, and he was really, really happy with it.
Yep. I've always heard good things about it. I never actually used any of it, but everything I heard was really
it seemed to be pretty rock solid. Let's go on to number 6, and number 6 is really interesting for us. Because number 6 still sneaks around out there in various chunks. You would never know this. So let me talk about who number 6 is. Number 6 is Cabletron Systems. And they were also a really big Cisco competitor. And they were founded in 1983 in Rochester, New Hampshire by Craig Benson and Robert Levine. And they started out, their first product was Ethernet transceivers and diagnostics tools. So are we talking about AUX to Ethernet adapters here? So I think that's what it was.
Yeah, they actually had a whole bunch of different things, including a clamp that you would put right on over the
vampire taps. They did the vampire taps right. Too. So, I have some lovely stories about these guys. So their most notable product was the Smart Switch and the MMAC Plus, which were early modular Ethernet switches with integrated management, considered ahead of their time, and they really were. And their estimated market cap in peak market was $3 to $5 billion. We're talking about the mid 90s. This is something that I did not know, or CDP, which is called the Cisco Discovery Protocol, actually started as the Cabletron Discovery Protocol used for managing their modular MMAC Plus switches. Cisco licensed and rebranded it when integrating it into their routers into Cabletron chassis before developing their own switching line, which they did by acquiring Granite Networking Systems. The biggest controversies is there were internal executive disputes and strategic missteps during the dot-com bust impacted the brand's momentum. And they failed because, I don't know if they failed so much as they fragmented, because the inability to transition from shared media to switched Ethernet was a big challenge for them.
Yeah.
Right? These guys were some of the kings of the hubs. They made some of the best ones out there. They were really, really good. And they were an overly complicated corporate structure.
So they had 4 different companies got spun out and as they got broken up. So one was a Prisma, which was a software company. There was that had management software. There was GTNS, which was a services company. So it's installation services and other types of services like that. There was Riverstone, and honestly, I'm not 100% sure what Riverstone did. And then there was Enterasys, and Enterasys took on their hardware line. That was their switching line, and then eventually took on wireless as part of another acquisition. Just disclosure, I was hired by Enterasys in December of 2012, and then Enterasys later got acquired by Extreme Networks.
Now, the interesting thing to me about this is that Cabletron was famous for its management. The management product was called Spectrum. And it was really, really good.
Right.
Spectrum's still alive.
Yeah, that's at Computer Associates now. Computer Associates owns.
So when you talk about the Enterasys management system, where did that come from?
That was built from scratch at Enterasys. So Spectrum ended up at a Prisma, and a Prisma got acquired by Computer Associates.
Okay. So now we know.
Yep.
Oh, okay. This is a fun one. I knew people who worked here, but I want you to do that. It's your turn.
So number 5 is Marconi Communications, also known as Marconi Electronic Systems. This was founded in the UK and was the telecom arm of the British defense contractor known as GEC. And it spun out of GEC in the 1990s during a privatization and deregulation timeframe. Its most notable product were ATM switches and a broadband networking gear used by telcos in the 1990s. So a little bit of a fun fact is that the Marconi equipment powered parts of the UK's air traffic controller and emergency services long after the company collapsed. This was so resilient that legacy Marconi routers were still found in service as late as the 2010s. And considering that they got acquired by Ericsson in 2005, and that was just their assets, that's actually saying quite a bit. The highest market cap that they achieved was somewhere around 35 billion British pounds, which is about 50 billion US dollars at its peak during the dot-com boom in that 1999-2000 timeframe, which, as we talked about earlier, was really the peak of the dot-com boom. They had a few different controversies, including some massive shareholder losses during the telecom crash that lost 99% of the corporate value. That's not so good when that happens. And why they failed was basically poor financial controls. They over leveraged some of their acquisitions, and they collapsed during the telco spending post 2001.
I would make an argument on their failure. I mean, the business reasons for their failure exist. And
Yep.
I had a neighbor who was in sales for these guys. So
Okay.
I would always go and tweak him because I was working at Cisco at the time and he was working at Marconi. We'd stand in his front lawn and debate technology. It was clear to me by previous to the collapse in 2000 that Ethernet was going to win. The
Yeah.
IP was the winner. And the problem is that Marconi made absolutely bomb-proof ATM switches.
Yeah.
And ATM in this case does not a thing that hands you money. This is a thing you hand money to.
Yeah.
Asynchronous transfer mode, which, as we like to put it, was the worst of both worlds between the telecom protocols and the IP protocols. They made some very, very weird choices with ATM, but it was connection oriented, and it was very deterministic. You could dial in exactly the performance, but it was extremely complex to configure. Their competitor, I'd say their big competitor at this point, was Lightstream, and they were acquired by Cisco. And I played around a lot with the Lightstream LS1010. I even got to play with the 2020, which was never released. Once you figured out how to get these things to work, incredible.
Yeah.
Right? You could just control. It was like a martinet, but we didn't have MPLS yet, multi-protocol label switching. MPLS makes this usable. By the time MPLS caught on, these guys were no longer a function.
So I'm going to say that it is a failure in this case, and the reason is that sometimes you bet on the wrong horse, or you bet on the right horse at the wrong time, and I think that that's what happened here. Is that again they may have been too early to market, and we've seen that happen way too many times. Or sometimes you just bet in the wrong direction, and it may have been a superior technology with bad marketing, and we've seen that happen, and we've talked about that under operating system failures where it's not always the best OS that wins or the best application that wins. It's sometimes the best marketed application. So in this case, at the end of the day, when your assets were sold off to another company, which is what happened, their assets were sold off to Ericsson in 2005, and then the remaining pieces were eventually folded into BAE Systems. I think you got to call that a failure.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, they really didn't. I mean, that technology in general failed.
Yeah.
Which brings us, by the way, to number 4. Let's talk about number 4 because it's still out there in a way. So number 4 is Brocade Communication Systems. Now, you've heard of them in this top 10 countdown already because they acquired Foundry. So Brocade was founded in 1995 in San Jose, California by Paul Bonderson and Seth Neiman. And they specialized in fiber channel SAN switching and data center networking. So they were absolutely notable for the Silkworm series of fiber channel switches. They were where you went to get a fiber channel switch if you had money. Brocade Sandworm SAN switches were so successful, fiber channel market, that EMC and HP bundled them under their own brand names, meaning many SAN admins use Brocade gear for years without knowing it, right? They were really good. And they peaked at 7.4 billion in the mid 2000s, which is cool because the crash in 2000 didn't impact them as much because they were playing in the data center segment. And the storage networking concept was still on the rise, even when everything else boomed. Everybody got hit. However, there was a massive controversy on executive stock options backdating in the 2000s. That really hurt them. And why they failed? Slow transition away from fiber channel. Market shifted towards IP and cloud networks. That's a nice answer. The real answer is a little more interesting because I did see this. There were two big players in the fiber channel market initially. One was Brocade, which was known to be expensive but excellent, and the other one was McData, believe it or not. You've probably heard of them, right? Eventually, I believe Brocade acquired McData when a third person jumped into the network, and that was Cisco. Through their Andiamo acquisition. And that is what really put pressure on Brocade because Cisco had a much wider portfolio. And at that point, they came out with the outgrowth of the initial Andiamo switches was the Nexus switch into the data center. And once companies, because there was this separation, right? We went from separated by data networks, separated by telco networks, separated by IP networks, separated by WAN. All these things were just these silos that never talked. And when a big enough company got in there, which was Cisco, they started to merge them, right? So you could maintain a storage network and an IP network at the same time and dynamically switch the SFP-based ports. That really put a huge amount of pressure on them. What ended up happening is that it was acquired by Broadcom in 2016. So the technology lives on. They're still a very big player. They own their own chips, right? So
right.
Brocade designed fiber channel chips. And essentially Broadcom acquired them in 2016 just to get at that technology. They took all the storage network stuff and took it sideways. Made them nothing but storage networking again. Because there's a ton of fiber channel out there, legacy fiber channel. Now, most people who are deploying these days are using, iSCSI, RDMA, stuff like that, IP-based technologies where the transport doesn't matter, right? So you can move up to faster and faster and faster networks just by using that technology. But the networking assets were sold to Extreme Networks.
The data center networking assets were sold to Extreme Networks, and then the campus and wireless were sold off and now belong to CommScope.
Didn't that go to Ruckus and then Ruckus went to CommScope? How did that work?
I forget the order. I thought actually Broadcom bought Ruckus and then
Broadcom bought Ruckus. Yeah, I think you're right. Broadcom bought Ruckus and then CommScope has them, which is kind of weird. But it's still out there, right?
It is still out there.
The technology lives on.
So number 3 is 3Com Corporation. So 3Com was founded in 1979 in Santa Clara, California by Bob Metcalf. And you may have heard that name. We'll talk about that in a moment. And it was one of the original networking hardware pioneers. Their most notable products were the Etherlink NICs and Office Connect series of networking gear, which dominated in the 1990s. So the fun fact is that the co-founder, Bob Metcalf, invented Ethernet. And he co-wrote the original Ethernet spec while at Xerox PARC. And this means that 3Com literally grew out of Ethernet's birthplace. So they really did have a big part of history. Their highest market cap achieved was during the dot-com boom. They got to about 35 billion. So they got up there, pretty good size. They did have a few strategic blunders. One example was they exited the core enterprise market to try to focus on consumer gear, thinking that consumer gear was going to blow up, not really realizing the low margins. That's just not a good place to go.
It did blow up, but you're right about the profit margins.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, networking gear in houses and homes, there's a lot of it, but you're not making a lot of money. I can buy switches pretty cheap on Amazon these days. They also had a few other mistakes in that they acquired US Robotics, which, at one point was a well-known company. They had really, they were the leaders in dial-up modems, and they were the original company for the Palm Pilot. We talked about Palm in previous episodes, but that market kind of fell apart as well. Between that, weak management, and their pullback from enterprise networking really led to their decline. And then they were acquired by HP. Again, we talked about that in a previous episode where we talked about operating system failures in 2010. And mainly their product lines have been since discontinued or absorbed into the Aruba product lines.
The thing, my story was up until mid gigabit Ethernet, you wanted a 3Com card.
Yeah.
3Com had the best NICs out there until Intel really got their act together. Now it's Intel.
Yep.
Right? But it didn't used to be. Intel got into this business rather late. Their initial forays weren't so great. 3Coms were bomb-proof, and they had fantastic software support. So if you were a Linux weasel in the early days, a penguin head, as it were, you were going out and searching down certain versions of 3Coms because they would not fail. It was the most amazing thing. So I was sorry. I was actually sorry to see them go.
Yep.
It really was. And I used to compete against them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, again, in the operating system episode, I own the original Palm Pilot. I own multiple models of Palm devices after that. So I had multiple USR modems back in the day. So I have a lot of love for US Robotics, and I had multiple 3Com devices as well. So a lot of love for them, and it was sad to see them go. And obviously, you got to have love for Bob Metcalf.
Fun fact. The first ever routed dial concentration server was a Cisco modem in a 3Com chassis.
Yeah.
How about something a little more devilish? Number 2 would be Lucent Technologies, right? Famous for their corporate logo of being a red stain from somebody who probably put down their coffee cup too quickly. That's the way I always thought of it. We referred to them as something else. They were originally a spin out from AT&T. So Lucent was sort of Bell Labs spun out. You really get down to it. The production and the research arm of AT&T became Lucent. So Bell Labs and Western Electric combined. And their most notable product was the 5ESS digital phone switch, which was huge. They're still out there. The Wavestar optical guide and the Orinoco Wi-Fi gear, right? They were one of the early Wi-Fi pioneers. And the thing is you would think, and it was thought this originally during the boom, Lucent got Bell Labs. Bell Labs did little things like the transistor, the C programming language, the solar cell, crossbar switching, Bell Labs, Shannon and all this stuff, Bell Labs. These incredible breakthroughs that we use every day came out of Bell Labs. And the most influential tech sector, the entire modern IT stack from silicon to software, most of what we use came out of there in one form or the other. We'll talk about that in another episode. And people were jazzed about that. I remember people buying the stock in they peaked at 250 billion with a B in 2000, one of the largest tech companies globally. They were big, big, big. And I was competing against them, and it was scary. Their controversies was SEC investigation over accounting practices, mass layoffs, and missed earnings. Why they failed? Over-reliance on optical and telco markets, mismanagement, collapse of the dot-com economy. I can tell you why they failed, because I had a front row seat. They failed because a handful of companies, major of which rhymes with a major cooking grease, came and kicked all of the spokes out of their wheel. When you bought a 5ESS switch, the big telco switch, the called Class 5 switches, not only did you buy this hugely expensive switch, that could do things. And this was in the period where people were upgrading to bring in ISDN. Right? ISDN was considered a next generation WAN networking technology. You could deliver to the home. So these switches were not cheap, and you couldn't just buy a switch. You had to buy a switch and the maintenance. And they made a lot of money on the maintenance, because if you wanted to move a phone line, you had to call somebody from Lucent to come out there and move that phone line. When voice over IP came along, which was partially invented out of our tech center that I worked at Cisco, it really screwed these guys, because what we did is we hooked up DHCP to the process, and we made the call control system just care about a different end identifier. It completely destroyed their professional services. And when that happened, that was like a super high margin business for them. People would buy these switches, they would depreciate them over 20 years, and then they would get this huge chunk of professional services. Once the professional services money went away, they were never able to adapt to that. I would say there's still a huge amount of technology from Lucent out there. They were acquired by Alcatel in 2006. If you've ever competed against Alcatel, you're just blown away when you hear that, right? Alcatel, which was another phone switch maker, and then they all sort of ended up in Nokia in 2016. There are a ton of 5ESS switches out there now. All they do is handle 911 and grandma who can't give up her landline.
Well, a lot of people might be surprised about the whole Nokia thing, and some people may not even realize that Nokia is still in business after the whole Nokia phone division got bought by Microsoft. But Nokia is one of the biggest players out there when it comes to 5G and eventually 6G, when it comes to cellular service and the antennas and all of the gear that goes along with that. And they are one of the pioneers, along with Huawei and a lot of the countries out there that have
And
blocked
Ericsson.
Huawei and Ericsson. And so a lot of the countries out there that have blocked Huawei from deploying, both Ericsson and Nokia are big players in that.
Nokia actually has a really good Ethernet switch right now too.
They do.
I've looked at some of their stuff is really quite good. So Nokia is no joke as a networking company. You should absolutely be looking at their technology. Why don't we talk about the number one? Because the number one really impacts this. And we made this the number one because, damn, this was an interesting ride to watch.
It really, really was. So number one is Nortel Networks. So Nortel was founded in, wait for it, 1895 in Montreal, Canada, as Northern Electric.
No way,
Oh, no way, so it eventually became Nortel Networks after acquiring, wait for it, Bay Networks in 1998. So what's old is new again. It comes around full circle. Its most notable products were the Passport router and the Meridian PBX, so for its phone systems and such there. It was an early leader in voice over IP, known as VoIP, and in optical networking. So that was really where it made its hay. Some interesting things that after Nortel went bankrupt, their 6,000 plus patents were sold off to a consortium that included Apple, Microsoft, RIM, that was the makers of BlackBerry, for $4.5 billion, making it one of the most valuable IP acquisitions in tech history.
It really
so kind of a big deal there. Now, in 2000, they hit a market cap of $250 billion Canadian. That's approximately, at the time, 190 billion US, making it Canada's largest company at the time. Now, they did have a few controversies. They had a fraud scandal, some financial misstatements that led to SEC charges and executive trials. So that means that's not good, especially when you are in that position and you're the country's largest company and you really, the phone systems rely on you. You cannot stand to have that kind of controversy going on. So and we're talking accounting fraud, we're talking massive debt, and then .com collapse happens and you've got executive mismanagement. That's not good for a company. And so what happened was, eventually, it took them a while, but they declared bankruptcy in 2009. They sold off those assets and then eventually sold off the company in pieces to Ciena, Avaya, Ericsson, and Extreme Networks. And they sold off even more to Extreme Networks when Avaya split up and sold their networking division to Extreme.
Yeah, one of the things that blew my mind about this, once again, I was in a competitive situation with them.
Yeah.
And if you think about Cisco now, big Cisco now, right? The 800-pound gorilla, right? We're up against Lucent and Nortel, who were like the gods of telecommunication. And we are constantly scurrying around, freaking out. So the best story was the passport routers. Nortel came out with built a next generation passport router. It was modular. It had high throughput. It was incredible. And we found out about it, right? And I worked with people who worked on this project at my next company. It was all that.
Yeah.
And they would have dominated the market if they'd been able to get that thing out the door. Nortel decided they were going to double down on voice. Nortel decided to double down on voice technology instead of data technology at a time when all things were shifting to data.
So with that, that's going to cover this episode. We couldn't do podcasts like this without listeners like you. We'd love to hear what you think. Did we miss a company on our list? Is there a networking company that was massive that no longer exists that we should have included on our list? Is there another topic that we should have covered? Is there another top 10 list that we should investigate and cover? Let us know. Send email to feedback@itsparkcast.com or hit us up on X @ITSparkcast. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment down below. Did you guess Nortel as the number one on our list? That would be interesting to see. And we're watching you. Don't put in Nortel now. We wanted you to put in Nortel at the beginning of the video, not now.
And by the way, I just want to mention Ungerman Bass. We didn't do Ungerman Bass.
We did not.
They were out there. I would argue, could they have been on this list? Not been on this list? I'd really like your feedback on this.
If we get enough responses and enough companies, we might do 10 more companies that no longer exist. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That's really going to help this channel grow. If you feel that you're getting useful information from us and that you're being entertained, please tell your friends and colleagues about us so that they can get the same information that you're getting. So with that, we're going to turn you back to your day. From the world of enterprise IT, take care.